Welcome to my channel where nightmares live. This is Midnight Tales.
What if your substitute teacher knew every student's name, but his own did not exist anywhere in the school system? A small-town classroom thought it was just another ordinary day, until the roll call began. The door sealed shut, the walls turned into shadows, and one by one, the children were called into something far darker than detention. Stay with me, because what happened in that classroom will leave you questioning who, or what, is really teaching. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk and old wood. Children whispered nervously as the door creaked open. A tall man stepped inside, his shadow stretching unnaturally long across the floor. He smiled, revealing teeth too sharp, too perfect. "Good morning, class," he said, his voice low, almost vibrating. Every child froze when he called their names, without looking at the roll sheet. Each name spoken with unnatural precision, as if carved into memory. The fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing louder with every syllable. One child raised a trembling hand. "Sir, what is your name?" The man's eyes glinted, black pools with no reflection. "My name," he answered slowly, "is not important." The children shifted in their seats, glancing at the door. But the door was no longer there. The windows looked out onto something vast and dark, like the inside of a cave. A cold wind swept through the room, though no windows were open. The man placed his hands on the desk. His fingers were too long, bending in ways bones should not bend. "You will listen. You will learn." The chalkboard filled itself with words, written in a language no one recognized. The letters twisted and writhed like living things, pulsing faintly as if breathing. One child whimpered, covering her eyes. The man turned his head toward her without moving his body. "Silence," he whispered, and her lips sealed shut. The children gasped, but no sound followed. The buzzing lights grew louder, the air colder. A low hum began beneath their feet, as if something massive moved below the school. The man began to recite from the writhing words on the board. Each word shook the walls, rattling the desks, making teeth chatter. The ceiling lights burst, plunging the room into shadows. Only the glow of the unnatural words remained, casting the man's face in a sickly light. He knew every child's name. And one by one, he began to call them again. But this time, when he spoke, something answered back. The voices that answered did not belong to the children. They were deeper, older, layered with echoes that seemed to crawl up from beneath the floorboards. Each syllable felt like claws dragging across the soul. The children sat stiff in their chairs, eyes wide, tears streaking down their faces. The substitute teacher raised a hand, and every desk trembled. Nails squealed against wood as the desks inched closer together, closing the children in. The sound was unbearable, like metal grinding against bone. The man's smile widened, splitting his face in ways no human skin should stretch. The glow of the words on the chalkboard pulsed faster, like a heartbeat racing out of control. The room stank of iron and mold, as though a grave had been opened beneath them. One boy tried to run. He pushed his chair back, stumbling toward the dark wall where the door had once been. The substitute did not move. He only spoke the boy's name again. The wall rippled like liquid, and something pale and skeletal pressed against it from the other side. Long fingers slid through the surface as if it were water. The boy screamed, but the sound never reached his classmates. The shadowed hand dragged him into the wall, leaving only a faint smudge where he had been. The other children shook, frozen in silence, unable to even sob. The man adjusted his tie, calm, deliberate, as though teaching a normal lesson. He tapped the chalkboard once. The writhing letters writhed faster, then began to drip down like tar, staining the floor. Where it touched the wood, smoke hissed upward, filling the room with a bitter stench. The children could hear faint voices whispering from the black liquid. Some of the whispers were in their own voices. The substitute's eyes shifted, no longer black pools, but windows to something vast and endless. It felt like the entire universe had turned to stare through him, pressing its weight into their tiny classroom. He called another name. A girl clutched her desk, nails breaking as she tried to resist. Her body shuddered, her chair rattling violently. The lights that remained flickered, and her shadow began to twist across the floor. It stretched, elongated, until it did not look like her anymore. Her shadow smiled when she did not. The substitute tilted his head, as though satisfied. "You see," he murmured, his voice resonating from every corner of the room, "you were always mine." The children felt the temperature plummet. Breath misted from their lips, forming shapes that seemed to linger in the air before vanishing. The desks inched closer again, locking them tighter, like a cage. The hum beneath the floor grew louder, shaking dust from the ceiling. It felt as if the entire school was alive, breathing with the rhythm of the man's words. The chalkboard letters swirled together now, forming a door of their own. Something on the other side pressed against it, eager, impatient. The substitute teacher looked at the class. His grin split wider still. "Attendance," he whispered, "is mandatory." The chalkboard door bulged outward, as though some enormous weight leaned against it from the other side. Every child stared, paralyzed, unable to breathe deeply, unable to move. The letters that formed the door writhed and screamed soundlessly, their shapes twisting into mouths that opened and closed. A low groan filled the classroom, a sound like an ancient gate grinding open. The floorboards shuddered, sending vibrations up through the children's legs. The substitute teacher placed both hands flat on the desk. His fingers curled, bending at impossible angles, knuckles snapping audibly. The room darkened further, though no lights remained to fail. It was as if the air itself grew heavier, thick, pressing down upon their shoulders. He called another name. This time, the child did not vanish. Instead, the space behind the child's eyes began to glow faintly, like candlelight flickering through paper. His mouth opened against his will. A sound poured out, deep, grinding, like stone dragged across stone. The children clutched their ears, but the sound was not heard with ears. It vibrated inside their skulls, rattling their teeth, searing their minds. The chalkboard door swelled, stretching its frame. Dark shapes writhed just beyond the surface, pressing, clawing, waiting. The substitute leaned closer, his face inches from the glowing child. "Good," he hissed. Another voice added to the choir. The boy slumped back, lifeless but breathing, his eyes still glowing faintly. Whispers rose from him, spilling into the air, joining the hum beneath the floor. The rest of the class sat rigid, their knuckles white against the wooden desks. One brave girl tried to speak, though her lips quivered uncontrollably. You are not a teacher." The man turned his head toward her with mechanical precision. His grin did not falter. "On the contrary," he replied, his voice layered with echoes, "I have been teaching longer than your world has existed." The chalkboard door shuddered violently. Cracks appeared across the black surface, glowing with a pale, sickly light. The substitute straightened, spreading his arms as if welcoming an audience. "You are the lesson," he said softly. "And they are here to learn." The cracks widened. Something vast exhaled from behind the door, a fetid breath that carried the stench of decay and soil. The children gagged, their eyes watering as the air grew thicker, darker. From the cracks, thin arms stretched through, arms covered in ash, fingers tipped with claws that scraped against the floor. They did not belong to any human form. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of lost voices echoing the names of the children. One by one, their names repeated, filling the air until the children could no longer tell which voice was theirs. The substitute's eyes gleamed like twin lanterns in the dark. He stepped back from the desk, giving the chalkboard door more space to swell. His shadow spread across the room, reaching toward each child like ink spilling across paper. The floorboards buckled beneath the growing hum, wood splitting, nails snapping free. The classroom groaned as if the building itself tried to pull away, but it could not. The substitute teacher clasped his hands behind his back, calm, patient, his smile unbroken. "Now," he whispered, "class begins." The classroom seemed to shrink as the chalkboard door cracked wider. The pale light spilling through was no comfort, it pulsed, alive, and wrong, like a heartbeat that did not belong. Every child's chest rose and fell in shallow, panicked breaths, yet none dared to scream. The substitute teacher paced slowly before them, each step deliberate, heels striking the floor like a ticking clock. "Do you hear it?" he asked, tilting his head as if savoring distant music. The hum beneath the floor had grown into a steady, bone-rattling vibration. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, and the fluorescent tubes above groaned in their fixtures, long since dead but still straining under invisible pressure. One child whimpered, a frail sound like a dying animal. The substitute snapped his head in that direction. His smile remained, but his eyes flared brighter, burning white-hot now, their glow cutting through the shadows. The child's whimper twisted into a shriek without her permission, her throat pulled open by a force unseen. Her body arched back, and her voice was stolen mid-scream, swallowed into the air, leaving her chest heaving soundlessly. The others trembled, desperate to close their eyes, but unable to look away. The chalkboard cracked again, jagged lines splintering outward. From the fissures, a dark liquid dripped, thick, tar-like, but writhing with tiny movements as if filled with insects. The liquid hit the floor with wet smacks, spreading in tendrils that crept toward the children's shoes. The substitute teacher stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still, his shadow now stretching unnaturally across every wall, touching every corner of the room. "Knowledge," he whispered, "must be earned." The tar tendrils wrapped around chair legs, tightening, holding the children captive. Wood cracked under the pressure. The chalkboard door shuddered violently, and a single claw pierced through, long, skeletal, slick with black fluid. It scraped against the wood, sparks leaping from the contact. A sound followed, so low it made stomachs twist, a guttural groan that carried hunger. The substitute's grin widened until it split the skin at the corners of his mouth. Dark fluid dripped from the tears, staining his collar. He spread his arms wide as though presenting a grand stage. "You will be remembered," he declared softly, his voice echoing as if spoken in a vast chamber. The chalkboard gave way with a thunderous crack. A hole yawned open, wide enough to see what waited beyond. It was not a world. It was an expanse of writhing shapes, an ocean of shadows, endless, seething, alive. Dozens of faces pressed against the threshold, human but distorted, eyes too wide, mouths too sharp, skin stretched tight like masks. They moaned in unison, a chorus of agony that seeped into the bones of every child. The substitute lowered his arms, calm once again. He turned to the children, his voice now tender, almost fatherly. "Step forward," he said. No one moved. The tar tightened around their ankles until the pain drew silent tears. The first row of desks slid closer to the chalkboard, pushed by an unseen force. The children's fingernails scraped grooves into the wood as they tried to resist, but resistance meant nothing here. The chalkboard door pulsed wider, and the first of the shadowed faces began to squeeze through. Their eyes glowed with the same pale light that now flickered faintly inside the children's own. The substitute teacher adjusted his tie once more, his smile calm, eternal. And then he whispered, with infinite patience. "Attendance will be taken, until every seat is filled." The desks groaned as they scraped across the floor, inching the children closer to the pulsing void. Their sneakers dragged helplessly, leaving black streaks where the tar clung. The chalkboard door throbbed like a wound, the pale light inside pulsing in rhythm with the children's quickened heartbeats. From the opening, more claws emerged, thin, skeletal, twitching as if eager to feel flesh. The faces pressing against the threshold pushed harder now, their distorted features stretching, skin splitting at the seams, leaking black fluid that hissed as it hit the floor. The substitute teacher stood before them, still and statuesque, his elongated shadow swallowing the room whole. His voice carried no urgency, only inevitability. You cannot leave until the lesson is complete. The hum beneath the floor rose to a violent tremor, rattling the desks so hard teeth chattered. The ceiling cracked above, showering dust and fragments of plaster onto their heads. A boy in the back row mustered the courage to stand, though his legs shook violently. He grabbed the edge of his desk, trying to haul it backward, away from the creeping dark. The substitute only spoke his name. The boy froze instantly, eyes widening, limbs locking into place as though strings had seized his body. Slowly, he began to move, but not by his own will. He shuffled forward in stiff, jerking motions, dragged step by step toward the chalkboard. The others watched, horrified, as his shadow stretched ahead of him, swallowed by the glowing fissure before he even reached it. When his body touched the threshold, the claws did not seize him. Instead, the faces parted, and the void drank him whole, pulling him in without a sound. The space he left behind smelled of burnt hair and copper. The children tried to scream, but their throats locked. Only their eyes moved, wide and wet, darting desperately for escape. There was none. The tar on the floor rose higher, crawling up their shins, pulsing as though it had veins of its own. Every heartbeat made it throb tighter around their legs. The substitute began to pace again, hands clasped neatly behind his back. "Obedience is the first step toward enlightenment," he said softly. His words slithered through the air, heavy, filling their ears and their thoughts. The chalkboard fissure widened with another ear-splitting crack, and a rush of air blew through the classroom, air that smelled of soil freshly turned from graves. The fluorescent fixtures above shattered all at once, shards raining down like glittering teeth. In the sudden dark, the only illumination came from the chalkboard door and the children's faintly glowing eyes. The substitute's face gleamed in that pale light, his mouth no longer human. It stretched open too wide, unhinging, revealing rows upon rows of teeth that spiraled inward like a tunnel. He inhaled deeply, and the air itself seemed to bend toward him. The children clutched their desks as their breath was pulled from their lungs, drawn toward the impossible mouth. One girl toppled forward, dragged by the suction, her small hands clawing at the wood until her fingernails split. Her body lifted from the floor, levitating helplessly toward him. The substitute closed his mouth abruptly, and she fell back into her seat with a sickening crack of bone. He exhaled slowly, savoring the fear like perfume. Behind him, the shadows writhed impatiently, their faces pressing harder against the widening gap. Dozens now. Perhaps hundreds. Every one of them mouthing the names of the children, syllables dripping like venom from their distorted lips. The substitute's voice rose above the cacophony, calm but absolute. "The door is open," he said. "You will go through, one by one, until none remain." The tar surged higher, clamping their thighs, locking them into their desks like shackles. The first row slid forward again, closer to the threshold. The claws reached farther now, eager, trembling. The hum below became a roar. The walls shook as if the entire school were collapsing inward. And yet the substitute stood motionless, his glowing eyes fixed on the children, his smile eternal. Class had only just begun. The room had shrunk to nothing but shadows, whispers, and the pulsing glow of the chalkboard door. The first row of desks hovered at its edge now, caught between the trembling classroom and the abyss beyond. The children's eyes, faintly glowing, reflected the pale light like trapped lanterns. The substitute teacher raised one hand, his long fingers unfurling like a spider opening its legs. The movement silenced the whispers. Even the claws froze, trembling in anticipation. "You have learned well," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "Your names are written, your places are marked. The lesson is complete." The tar that bound their legs shivered, then released, dripping back into the floor like a receding tide. But there was no relief. The children could feel it inside them now, deep in their veins, pulsing in rhythm with the hum below. Something had already taken root. The substitute teacher stepped away from the glowing door. Behind him, the fissure convulsed, as though alive, its edges closing with a slow, sucking groan. The pale faces pressed harder, desperate, but they were pulled back into the void, their glowing eyes winking out one by one. The door sealed with a final shudder, leaving only an empty chalkboard smeared with faint black stains. The classroom was silent. The lights were gone. The air hung heavy and still, as if nothing had ever moved at all. The children sat frozen at their desks, silent, their eyes dimming to black. The substitute teacher turned toward them, his smile no longer sharp but calm, composed, almost human again. He adjusted his tie. He picked up the roll sheet from the desk. The paper was blank. And yet he looked at it with satisfaction, nodding slowly as if reading invisible words. He set the sheet down, turned toward the wall where the door had once been, and stepped forward. The wall rippled like water and swallowed him whole, leaving the faintest echo of his voice behind. Class dismissed. The next morning, when the principal opened the classroom, every desk was empty. No chalk on the board. No bags, no notebooks, no children. Only silence. The school system searched for records, but the students' names were gone, erased, as though they had never existed. But the roll sheet remained. Blank, waiting. And sometimes, when the hallways are empty and the building sleeps, faint whispers drift from behind that closed classroom door. Children's voices. Repeating their names. Over. And over. And over.